Welcome wherever you're joining us from, whether it be across the UK and Ireland, as far afield as Tenerife or around the world. Extra time for those who haven't seen one as yet is a chance to hear an interview, watch an interview with a high-profile individual who's perhaps achieved quite a lot in sport. And we're very lucky today to have a guest who has certainly done that, particularly over the past few years, making big waves at Liverpool Football Club. Before introducing, just a quick word, if you would like to ask a question, of course, you should know how to use the text bar on the side. Those questions should drop in automatically, and I will try and get through as many as possible. It's a perfect way to end your week. We've got a brilliant guest with us today, live from America, Santa Barbara to be exact, but Merseyside was his home as a young boy, and indeed for the past few years as he was involved in the remarkable events that saw Liverpool win a Champions League and, of course, the Premier League after a 30-year wait. Petermore, the former Liverpool chief executive. Welcome, Peter.
Hey, Steve. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good morning here from Santa Barbara, California. My apologies for the sunshine. For those of you, particularly on Merseyside, the yellow ball in the sky is something I'm sure you haven't seen in a little while, but I'm going to move around as the sun moves. But it's great to be able to chat with everybody here, 8 a.m. here on a balmy Friday morning here in Southern California.
Absolutely. I think it's a problem we'd all like to have. Look, you've only just made that switch, haven't you? And I alluded straight away to your connections to Merseyside and your love of Liverpool Football Club. We'll get onto your gaming background a little bit later on, but let's kick off straight away with that remarkable moment in your life where you were asked by the Fenway Sports Group to come on board at Liverpool. What did it mean to you?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those, and as people's careers progress, you will encounter people called headhunters. They're not as aggressive as they sound. They're executive recruiters that are trying to lure you into a different career. They are contracted by employers to go find the best and the brightest for a role, usually a relatively high-profile role, because it isn't cheap. But I got a call, this would be in the summer of 2016. And executive recruiters kind of dance around the situation because they want to get a feel for your interest before they get into some details. But once I realized that the role was Chief Executive Officer of Liverpool Football Club, obviously that piqued my interest. I had actually got to know John Henry and Tom Werner and Mike Gordon prior to this in being this kind of strange dude born in Liverpool, lived in Boston working for Reebok. Big fan of the Boston Red Sox, obviously a huge Liverpool fan, but also somebody primarily in my video game career that had come to the fore as regards leading large organizations through a lot of turmoil and disruption. And certainly video games over the last 10 years have experienced plenty of that. So for somebody that, my dad took me to Anfield in 1959. We went to see Liverpool beat Leyton Orient 4-3 in November of that year. Bill Shankly was still yet to arrive at the club, and I can still remember those days, and I kind of progressed from the boys' pen to the paddock to the cop, and then eventually, more recently to the boardroom. So it's been a great journey for me. My dad, I owe a lot to for imbuing a love of this incredible football club that we have, as well as understanding what the football club means to the city of Liverpool. And as I learned when I joined the club, the hundreds of millions of fans around the world who bluntly live and die by each result. And obviously, nervous weekend coming up with a big game against our friends from up the M62 on Sunday. So yeah, it was a phenomenal moment, Steve.
Absolutely. Now, from what you've said there, it was clear that you had that emotional connection as a young guy growing up. But once you take a role within the football club, and particularly that role, do you understand far more about the size and the dynamic of Liverpool Football Club globally?
Yeah, having come out of Silicon Valley, where I worked for the past 20 years, data was important. People could say big football club. I need to know numbers behind that. So we actually commissioned Nielsen to get a feel for what the size and magnitude of our fan base was. We knew that we believed, and I still believe, we are the biggest football club in the world by a number of metrics. Nielsen calculated, and I challenge this, 771 million people around the world follow Liverpool Football Club. Now, anything on the continuum of follow from, I'll look at their score first, to I fly over from Bangkok every other weekend to Anfield to watch the game, and every step in between. I truly believe, having gone through the numbers and then arrived at a number that I felt comfortable talking about publicly, that there are about 400 million people who would put their hand up and say, I'm a Liverpool fan. And so the real challenge when I arrived, and you remember these days, Steve, is that the local fans, Scousers believe that they have this birthright to be able to get a ticket to Anfield, to, if they want to, be on the Kop. And in the days when I used to go, you rolled up and it was 50p, pushed through the turnstiles, and you go fight for a place on the Kop, having progressed from the boys' pen. But I also could recognize that there was some friction and tension, which you have with a global entity, where we rely so much on that local passion and the atmosphere at Anfield, which is unique, having been to most of the major football stadiums in the world now throughout my life. From that perspective, and I coined this phrase, local heart, but with a global pulse. And that was both descriptive of Liverpool Football Club, but also gave us a business platform by which to be able to address some of the challenges and figure out where we were going to deploy our resources to tread this fine line to make sure that we understood that Anfield and You'll Never Walk Alone and the Shankly era and Kenny Dalglish and Ian Rush, and more recently, obviously, coming into an era with Jurgen Klopp coming in, you have to meld all of that together. You trade on that. You actually build that as your platform by which you trade on that. And by that, I mean the imagery of those days, the unique history. You build marketing platforms like This Means More, which I think is indicative of what it means, certainly what we saw in winning the Premier League for Liverpool fans. It sounds pretentious and a little pious, but it does mean more for a Liverpool fan maybe than it does for other football fans, because of the unique nature of the relationship between the people of Liverpool, the people around the world who support the club, the city itself, and the football club. And so, from that perspective, I really got to figure out, both from a metrics perspective as well as from an emotional passion perspective, what Liverpool means for fans around the world.
You had an incredible few years, Peter, with the football club. Now, this doesn't just happen by chance, and you sort of alluded to it there. Everything has to fit into place. That might be from having a great chief executive. It might be from having a manager like Jurgen Klopp. And it's interesting that and you reference Bill Shankly, and it's often said that he is the closest thing to Bill Shankly. You've seen him at close quarters. How big has it been for Liverpool to have Jurgen Klopp and that relationship?
Yeah, I mean, Shankly, of course, famous quote, which I was made for Liverpool and Liverpool was made for me. Or, from that perspective, you could say absolutely the same about Jurgen Klopp. Shankly from Glenbuck in Ayrshire in Scotland, not a Scouser, not even English, but understood what football meant for the people of Liverpool. Jurgen Klopp coming from Mainz to Dortmund, working class environments, and then coming to Liverpool, fully understanding what Liverpool Football Club means to the people, the red half of Liverpool, and equally importantly for the people all around the world who, when you talk to them, as I did, as I traveled the world and did things like this, or more likely spent my evening in a bar at the official Liverpool Supporters Club in some dive bar in Dubai or Bangkok or Barcelona, as I've done, and talk for hours about the football club and made presentations and made those fans try to feel a little bit closer, even though they were geographically thousands of miles away, make them feel closer about the football club. So yeah, the uniqueness of what Liverpool is, you can go Shankly, you can go Paisley, you go all the way through, the recently tragically late departed Gerard Houllier, Rafa Benitez, all the way through. And I don't want to miss anybody out, but those are the core guys, Joe Fagan, and obviously more recently you get into Brendan Rodgers and now Jurgen Klopp, who for many people is the best manager in the world right now, and certainly by far the most charismatic, and one that can speak eloquently about football, but knowing him as well as I do, can equally speak as eloquently about life in general. And I think that's a rarity in football managers, who tend to be just very myopic about football itself. You've spent a lot of time, Steve, with Jurgen. You know that he's a very worldly, broad-thinking human being. And I think the people of Liverpool appreciate that, because we're kind of a global city by the nature of our history of seafaring. So we appreciate somebody that sees past just the boundaries of the city of Liverpool, and Jurgen certainly does. And and being a somewhat socialist, left-leaning individual as well helps in the city of Liverpool, as you well know.
I think one of the great examples he sets, Jurgen Klopp, and perhaps it's an important lesson for people watching today who want to forge a career in sport, is the way that he understands the club, but also the way he communicates around it as well.
Yeah, I think that there is that understanding of the fans that is important. You know, he does things that a lot of managers don't feel comfortable doing. He'll speak about issues outside of football and stick his neck on the line, as he's done since the day he arrived at Liverpool. He is, having spent a lot of time in his presence, either on team planes, you know, watching him in press conferences, dealing with commercial partners, and perhaps more importantly, how he manages players. He is an unbelievable manager of men. And by that I say, you know, a football club with the assessed value of Liverpool now, just short maybe of £1 billion, has all kinds of characters, and you've interviewed most of them and interacted with most of them. Chemistry is critical. And there's so many football clubs around the world that have wonderful players, but somehow can't make it all gel together. What Jurgen does is he understands each individual player. Some players need a kick in the rear. Some players need an arm around them. Everybody needs a Klopp hug. We all need a Klopp hug. But he somehow manages to knit together this incredible collective. And that is, I think, symptomatic of socialism, but also symptomatic of what a team spirit is. And I've seen it firsthand. Yeah, I mean, there is competitive to score goals, and there's bonuses against a lot of things that players want, and you can see that. But, you know, somehow, somewhere, despite little flare-ups, you get the feeling of being around the players that everybody is pulling in the same direction. And it goes back to Bill Shankly. His idea of socialism is everybody working together for the same objective, and football's no different. And Jurgen understands that.
Absolutely. If you've just joined us, our special guest is Peter Moore, the former Liverpool chief executive, who's currently in the Santa Barbara sunshine. Don't worry about moving around the sundial, Peter. If it keeps you out of the sun rays, we're quite happy to watch you move about. I will try and mix in some questions from our audience at the same time as us having a chat. So we could be going in any direction here. We'll start with Harley Burns, who said, what would you say, Peter, is the proudest achievement of your life so far?
Of my life?
Yeah.
Wow. I like to think that my children have been successful as a result of maybe me being able to give them every opportunity to be successful, giving them the right education, encouraging them to push boundaries. They're all American. They were born here in the US. They're all adults. They're all successful in their own right. I think, you know, when your time comes, you'll look back and you'll look at your children, and business is great, but family is everything. And so when I think of my kids, all who are doing well, living in, depending on the day, New York City, San Francisco, Los Angeles, all with professional careers, you look back, and I think the obligation of people is to improve upon what the previous generation gave you. And my dad was a working class dad, God bless him. My mum was a nurse at Alder Hey. My dad worked on the Liverpool docks. Great jobs, performing wonderful work at a working class level, but gave me the platform to have some level of success. You know, fortuitously, and I still don't know how, I passed the 11 plus, which gave me a key to grammar school and to O levels and to A levels and to university. And it's those moments in your life. And look, I'm in a few weeks, I'll be 66. So I'm talking 55 years ago. I can still see me sat at Grove Park Grammar School for Boys in Wrexham, filling in the 11 plus, thinking, I've failed this. I have totally screwed this up. And in those days, and I don't think any of you are old enough to remember it, there was this divergence of the 11 plus. You were either going to be on a path to get to university, or you better figure out what trade and what physical working profession you were going to be in. So I think that obligation is, you know, when you leave this earth, that you have left your generation, the next generation behind you in a better place than you had it yourself, is key. And I'd like to think, you know, from a perspective, when I think of my kids, that they're certainly in that situation. They've had everything. They've been fortunate, and they would recognize that. They've all had the opportunity to go to university and graduate some of the best universities in the United States, and they're pursuing professional careers, and that would be what I'm most proud of.
You feel blessed about that. Look, it's probably a good moment to mention the foundation that you set up in Liverpool, because that is also something that will be quite high up on your priority list, helping perhaps others or individuals who haven't had the opportunity that you've had.
Yeah, I mean, when my wife and I, again, chasing the sun, when my wife and I arrived in Liverpool back in April of 2017, we lived for a few months in the city itself, in the West Tower, which is a big kind of the tallest building in Liverpool there. And that gave us the opportunity to walk around and explore. I hadn't lived in Liverpool. I'd left Liverpool in 1965. And so it had been close to 50 odd years since I had lived in Liverpool, and 38 years since I'd lived in the UK. My wife's an American, never lived outside of the United States. And one of the things that was obvious, the renaissance of this magnificent city was clear. You walk on the waterfront, all the way down to the Albert Dock, all the way down to Toxteth, and walk back, and what a magnificent jewel on the Mersey, as I called it, it was. But you didn't need to go far to see austerity, poverty, streets that hadn't changed since I was a lad, particularly growing up as I did on Scotland Road, and my dad having a pub on Dryden Street, which is right by the tunnel entrance. And it was very clear to me that I had an obligation of somebody that had benefited from being born in Liverpool. And I say that because being born a Scouser, you've got an advantage over anybody else in the world. You've got this sense of cockiness and self-confidence and big personality and an aura about you as a Liverpudlian that we all need to leverage. And I was certainly able to leverage my Scousness, during my tough times of coming here as an immigrant in the United States, which was not easy for the first few years. So long story short, I've done well in life financially. I've been able to, in my video game career, do okay, make a few bob, as we say in England. And it's very clear to me that the people of Liverpool in these areas we walked through needed my money more than I needed my money. And I'll be just fine. So I funded the Petermore Foundation, founded it there in the summer of 2017, funded it from here in the US, and went about with my wife figuring out how we could help these people from Alder Hey Hospital, which I felt I had an obligation to give back because my mum was a nurse there just after World War II, funded cancer treatment rooms there. Food banks became a big deal. It was horrific to me to learn how much food poverty there was first of all in Britain, but more so in Liverpool. And Stephen and everybody, I think, that lives in Liverpool is well aware of fans supporting food banks and the great work that Ian Byrne, our MP, and Dave Kelly do, Reds and Blues together. And, the first few games, they rolled up to Anfield collecting food from fans. What we tried to do is make going to the game, you couldn't go to the game unless you stopped at Tesco on the way and grabbed a bag of food and dropped it off. And you're very familiar with this, Stephen. And their rickety old van, I said, boy, this thing's not going to make it back to the food bank. So I sat down with them. I bought them the big purple van that you now see that's ubiquitous at Anfield and Goodison Park, so that they could be more efficient in collecting food to be able to help these people who cannot put food on the table right now. And COVID has exacerbated that. So I think the ability for me to give back to the people and the city that gave me so much and such a great start in life, if you will, as regards the power of Scousness, which is actually a TED talk I did about a year ago at TED Liverpool, is something that you reflect upon. And before we went live here, we were talking about you get to the point in life where it's about giving back, not about taking anymore. And I've certainly, a while back, passed that moment in my life. And a lot of it is doing things like this, trying to impart any pearls of wisdom that I might have, but equally importantly, helping those that help me. And I'm fortunate that I'm in a position to do so.
Yeah, and you certainly are. Right. Let's get to a few of these questions. I'll jumble a few together. This from Kai McDowell, who says, how has it felt seeing the rise of Liverpool over the past few seasons from perhaps being in the shadow of other clubs? And above that, and I've actually lost the question, it was a question about perhaps what are the tougher aspects of being in the job? And I've linked the two together because I think there is this element of expectation, isn't there, when you run Liverpool Football Club? And there was a demand on yourself at the top of the hierarchy or the manager to actually bring silverware, to bring Liverpool back to the top, if you like.
Yeah. Now, if you're old enough, you remember the glory years of the 70s and the 80s where we won everything. I mean, of course we won. And in fact, you were disappointed if we came runners up in the league. You were disappointed if somehow we weren't challenging in those days in the European Cup Winners' Cup, the UEFA Cup. We were and are European royalty. So it was just felt like every season, not only did we have these challenges, domestically with the FA Cup and the league, of course, but also we were always traveling to exotic places on Wednesday nights and Tuesday nights and whatever it happened to be. And that's just who Liverpool were. I think, from the mid 90s on, the kind of wheels fell off a little bit and we lost our way. And what happened, I think, then is that the club had commercially lost its way a little bit as football changed, as the Premier League became this financial behemoth, as transfer fees went from, I remember the first £100,000 player thinking, there is no way, Alan Ball for Everton, there's no way anybody can, spend more money than that on a footballer. And here we are, where, the Neymars of this world for going for 230 million. So football changed dynamically. I think clubs, bluntly, like Manchester United, got ahead in the commercial business that allowed them to afford more players and better players than other clubs. Liverpool now have certainly caught up on that. And it is so heartening to see, a generation. I have a nephew who's 31 who had no recollection of Liverpool winning the league, which is bizarre to me. I remember all 18 league titles prior to this one. To be able, and one of the great memories I'll take is being on the bus when we took the European Cup, the Champions League trophy, through the streets of Liverpool. You remember that day, Steve? I mean, it's just something that was absolutely stunning. 750,000 people on the streets. For me, looking down at the faces of those people as we drove through Kensington and Tobruk and Islington, they really don't have a lot to be thankful for. They don't have an affinity to anything bigger than their own lives, which can be challenging at times. What they do have is Liverpool Football Club. And so when Liverpool win, they win. And this period we've had of really not winning anything, it's been tough on those people. And so that outpouring of just pure joy and passion that you saw was absolutely incredible. And that again is a moment that I'll never forget, being on the bus with the players, looking down at the sheer joy, grown men in absolute tears of this 30, 40 seconds they'd waited 4 hours on the side of the streets for, of the team bringing the European Cup and showing it to them. It was phenomenal time. So yeah, the 3-year period I was there, champions of everything and everywhere. And so, on the pitch, couldn't have been asked for a better period in Liverpool's history.
Such a momentous time. We'll move on to this from Joanne Nicol, who says, what's the best Liverpool match you have been at? As Peter just diverts away to his 3 p.m. position.
Let me get this right. Let me get this right.
There we go. That's a bit better if you get yourself in the shade focus, there.
Yeah. If I lean over to the right like this.
As long as you're comfortable, Peter. No, imagine you're leaning on a defender.
No, yeah, exactly. Well, I've done that many times.
Yeah, Joanne says it's the best Liverpool match, but we were talking before we came on to this about the Barcelona away game, which perhaps might go down in the other category as the worst ever. But I think it's a great conversation to talk about how empowering sport can be and how unity within a team or a club can achieve almost the impossible.
Yeah, I mean, people remember, the game at Anfield. For me, the Barcelona game was spread over 8-9 days, because we went to Barcelona, and in my role, you sit next to the opposing chairman in this particular instance, José María Bartomeu, the president of Barcelona, an absolute gentleman who I still stay in touch with, even though he's no longer rather controversially involved with Barcelona. And so the protocol, what happens is that, it can get a little awkward, right? You're sat right next to them. He's jumping up when they score. I'm jumping up when and so you almost apologize to each other in this. In this particular instance, he if you recall that game away at Barcelona, we actually were the better team by far. And he, a great football aficionado, kept leaning over and said, "You're killing us. You're killing us." And then I think Suarez scored the first goal, and he apologized. He said, "We have no business being ahead." And then when the Messi free kick went in and the final whistle went, he said, I don't know how we were able to win 3-0 with a performance like that. So then fast forward to the return leg at Anfield, and what happens on a Champions League day is it is my job to host the visiting executives. And so what we typically do is, in the last couple of years, we've taken them to the Art School, which is, if you live in Liverpool, know is a superb restaurant in the Georgian Quarter, Paul Askew, chef, and we have a private room, and we have typically a lunch in which there's protocol, the UEFA delegates are there, I present, so blah, blah, blah. But Barto, as he likes to be called, was constantly telling me, "I'm worried about tonight." And I thought he was just winding me up because, look, we all know what happened. It's great now, but we were down 3-0, which meant if Barcelona could score one goal, then we had to score 5. And, we all know how it ended. But I will say, he said, "No, I'm worried. The way you played, I worry about us." And you might recall Roma had turned them over the previous year with a similar lead. And I think that was sticking in his mind. So that wonderful night at Anfield, when the final whistle went, and this is the quality of people, despite the crushing disappointment and embarrassment, because I think ultimately it cost him his job as president. He came over, where I sit in the director's box, and he would be sitting across the aisle, maybe 4 feet away, hugged me, this is pre-COVID, and said, "Now go on and win it because you deserve it." And let me tell you, there are a lot of executives that don't do that, a number in particular just storm off and don't even shake hands once Liverpool inevitably had beaten them. But that Barcelona period will stick with me for the rest of my life. And when you think about the odds, remember, no Mo, Andy Robertson off in the second half, Bobby, all of this, you think about, it's Divock. It's basically Divock and Gini against arguably at that time the best team in the world, and conquering Messi, Suarez, Coutinho, you name them, that night was unbelievable. And it was one of those nights where, as my wife will attest, once I get home, even though I'm not out there kicking the ball, the adrenaline is running. And I remember getting home probably midnight and then having to watch the entire game again on television till about 3 a.m. Just so I could soak it all in, understand it better, and then let my adrenaline drop down again so that I could actually go to sleep. What an incredible night that was. But the power of the collective, as detailed by Bill Shankly 50 years earlier, was still, for the men in red, was still flowing through, regardless who was wearing those shirts. They were Liverpool players.
Absolutely. And perhaps the challenge for the manager as well. Beth Fowley puts here, how would you describe the journey from losing a Champions League final to winning one? So actually, if you think about how Jurgen Klopp was dealing with that, and some of the players in the side as well, that's a remarkable thing to do, isn't it? To get so close to fall, but actually get back up again.
Well, I think, you look at Kiev, obviously 3-1 to Real Madrid. Again, a game that I thought we've done enough to be very competitive in, obviously, and, well-documented mistakes that were made. It was 0-0, and, the second half seemed to have just kicked off, and all of a sudden, the ball's in the back of the net from a a mistake, and Benzema, jumped on it to his credit. Sadio equalizes, but then, Gareth Bale's overhead kick is one where, bizarrely, I remember myself applauding, which is a little weird, because it was crushing for us at Liverpool, because I thought, that's it. But it's also one of the better goals I've seen live, to be blunt. And then the third goal was a swerving shot again by Bale. But I will say this: I remember the team having the resolve, flying back the next morning from Kiev. The team had the resolve. Nobody was down, because I think they all understood, and I assume Jurgen had instilled this in at the final whistle, is that this was a learning experience. Next year we will use this, and we will go all the way as a result of this. So, and as you recall, a couple of changes: goalkeeper, bringing in key defenders and what have you. Just a few little nips and tucks changes, but the core team was still pretty much the same. You remember that Mo had to go off in the final after a tackle from Sergio Ramos. So all of this was psychologically crushing, but what doesn't kill us makes you stronger. And I think that edict was taken into the following season, where we pretty much steamrolled anybody in our way. Barcelona included, Bayern Munich, if you recall, going. That for me, interestingly, was one of the bigger games. Was 0-0 at Bayern, and I do remember, again, a lesson here in experience. The Bayern Munich executives jumping up and down at the final whistle, because they thought 0-0 at Anfield was their ticket to the next round. But Karl-Heinz Rummenigge remembers the last time he was playing, it was 0-0 at Anfield and got beat in Munich. He remembered that, and again, an absolute gentleman, said, "Boy, this is far from over." And he said, "I wish we'd have got a goal," because an away goal, as you know, is vital. And we went to Munich, and in a pretty, when I say hostile, unbelievable environment there, easily beat them with the stunning goal from Sadio Mane. In fact, 2 goals from Sadio, if you recall, with the pass from Virgil and spinning Manuel Neuer backwards. That was an incredible night as well. And again, Karl-Heinz Rummenigge and Uli Hoeneß, 2 German legends of the game, came straight to me and said, "Congratulations, go ahead and win this." And I was so happy for them the following year that they won. Again, they had got beaten by us, embarrassed by us, but they took that, and Hansi Flick produced a stunning performance against Barcelona, you recall, and of course beating PSG in the final. So these things about losing is tough, but it's horrific if you don't take anything from it. Both ourselves, and then followed by Bayern Munich, took hard defeats and then turned them into unbelievable victories the following year.
A great example of the respect shown amongst top clubs as
Absolutely.
well. Quite a few questions about transfers, and obviously you refer to a period where big transfers were made. Some of the people on here saying, what role do you play in a transfer? How difficult is it to work in the market now? There's a specific question here talking about Virgil van Dijk and how tough that was to get over the line. And maybe this one here in terms of the biggest transfers, are they really tough to achieve?
So I think I made it very clear during my tenure there, and you know this, I had nothing to do directly with the transfer business. My job was to make sure the money was there, if you will, to afford the players. The way Liverpool was and are structured, and the way modern football clubs now structure, is that you have the manager and the sporting director, the scouting staff, the sports science and analytics staff all work together, identifying needs from what the manager thinks he needs in a particular season or the season ahead. And the work in transfers is done primarily by the sporting director, who will work with the manager, sit down, say, here's a player we think is available for this price. Ownership, of course, has to approve as well. But my direct involvement in the transfer business was pretty close to zero. I was obviously aware of what was going on. We needed to make sure that financially we were in a position to be able to afford a player and to manage not only incoming players, but also to to manage out players that were better served playing somewhere else and getting maximum value for them. But, COVID has changed a lot of things. It's very clear, that a lot of football clubs have to ratchet back. Does that change, I think, the overall value proposition in the market? Probably down the line, as you're seeing football clubs announce their financial statements now, and you can see how much challenge COVID has presented. No match day income, having to take a hit on media rights. But the transfer business, I believed and learned very quickly, and it was made very clear to me when I came into the role, my job was the business of football, not the business of footballers, if you will. And we left it to the absolute professionals. The challenge that I could see coming from a corporate background is that if your CEO is involved day to day in the transfer business, everything else tends to fall through the cracks at times, unless you've got a massive organization underneath. And so I think more and more you're going to see the role of sporting director become a very prolific role in modern football clubs. Already is, certainly outside of England. There's a legacy of the CEO wanting to get involved in the negotiations. But you talk to most of the big European clubs, and they have a specialty group headed by a sporting director that manages the transfer business.
You've talked about your remit being the financial one within the club. I suppose the financial pressures now, and you've mentioned it there on clubs worldwide, are huge because of COVID. What are the pressures that a club like Liverpool faces? I think it's pretty well documented that it's probably lost something like 125 million pounds up to this point.
Yeah, I mean, the loss of match day income. Look, remember, Liverpool invested enormously in a brand new main stand, A, to increase the attendance capacity, but also B, to drive revenue. It allowed the club to build better quality corporate hospitality to quite frankly, get in line where a lot of other clubs had already gone. That drives revenue. Football is a classic virtuous cycle. You drive revenue, you take that revenue, you buy better players give you better results and victories and trophies attract better sponsors who drive revenue and write bigger checks, and that goes in this classic virtuous cycle. All of a sudden, if that cycle is broken because the revenue is not there, then everything else has to be adjusted. But yeah, I mean, the match day income losses of Liverpool ultimately, depending when we ever get back, will be well in excess of 100 million pounds. And that's got to be, that's real money that it's got to be assessed and found somewhere else. The ability to negotiate with the media companies was key. And I think all of us wish fans were there, but at least we're watching football. And you turn up EA Sports soundtrack, and it maybe sounds like there's a crowd there. Having attended, I think 8 games behind closed doors in my previous role, it is the most bizarre experience. It's like sitting at an empty stadium. There's maybe 20 people there, and I don't know whether you've had the chance to do it, Steve, in your reporting capacity, but it's like It's like being at Sefton Park and watching, throw a couple of jumpers down either end, and you hear every word. And what's certainly, for me, it shows who the leaders are, because you can hear everything out there. And for me, there was only 2 players. It was Virgil van Dijk, whose booming baritone would emanate across all of the stadiums, and Jordan Henderson, who does not have a booming baritone, but his Mackem accent, he just never shuts up. And it's almost like he's, Martin Tyler, he's commentating on the game. And you must have experienced this if you've been at Anfield, and this, you can hear everything. Some of it you don't want to hear, but bluntly, you can hear who the leaders are.
I had a similar experience. Actually, sat next to James Milner for a game, and he has got a similar mouthpiece on him. Never stopped. Clear management material.
Absolutely, yeah.
They're out there, aren't they? The club's in great hands, isn't it? You can't say that about all football clubs, but I think for Liverpool fans, and given perhaps what they experienced with American owners over 10 years ago, this ownership group is in a really good place and the right partner.
Absolutely. I mean, the benefit that you have with Fenway Sports Group is this is not their first rodeo, as we say here in the States, that they had a similar situation with the Boston Red Sox. Boston Red Sox, huge club, great stadium, historic stadium in Fenway Park. but had underperformed, unlike Liverpool, who'd underperformed for maybe 20 odd years, 86 years since the Boston Red Sox had won the World Series. And they took, but still selling out every game. There's this aura, as there is of Liverpool, that regardless of the result, you want to be there. You want to be in Fenway Park. And I was lucky enough in the 90s, working for Reebok and being based in Boston, to spend a lot of time learning baseball deeply, understanding what baseball meant to American culture and society, and laughing at the Boston Red Sox, who would find the most incredible ways of snatching defeat from the jaws of victory on a regular occasion. But Fenway Sports Group came in, acquired the club, I believe, in 2001, and by 2004 had won the World Series. And I was living in Boston at the time and remember it very, very well. So they knew what it took to build not only a championship team, but a championship structure underneath that team in the form of what they call in baseball back office staff. They rejected any plea to knock down Fenway Park and go build a new stadium to compete with the New York Yankees, in the same way that they rejected a lot of plans that were already in place to knock down Anfield and build a new stadium on Stanley Park. And I think we all agree it was the right decision. Obviously, instead of knocking it down, as we discussed, they built the new main stand. Plans are well underway now for the expansion of Anfield Road. The stadium then will be at 61,000. You'll still have the Cop. You'll still be in the same place that the club played its first game. And we all remember that Everton originally played there. So from the perspective of maintaining the history of the club, it was the right decision to make. But that ownership group, to your point, Steve, understands patient capital, investing in the right people, being patient. Jurgen's first, 50 games were not setting the world on fire, but they knew they had the right man. They didn't, knee jerk towards another manager, which a lot of clubs have done if nothing is happening after the first 6 months. They had a long-term plan for success, and obviously, that has turned into, beyond our wildest dreams, to be FIFA World Club Cup, European champions and Premier League champions, Super Cup as well, all within the same 15-month period.
You must be very proud of all that. Do you watch it like a fan now on Sunday? You'll get up there at 8 a.m. Are you watching it, with those similar fan nerves?
I will not sleep Saturday night because I know I need to get it. I mean, it's actually a late game, 8:30 a.m. The 12:30 a.m.s there, PMs, I get up at 4 o'clock here. I'll put my shirt on like anybody else, pair of shorts, depending on the time of day, cup of coffee. If it's a little later, there might be a beer involved. But I'm absolutely a fan. It's, I think it's easier for me to watch it when behind closed doors. Once it's full again, it's going to be harder for me because, when I was there, 3 years there, I realized I attended 160 games and obviously never missed a game in my entire time. Well, preseason tours, postseason tours, every League Cup game, every FA Cup game, and of course, every Premier League and Champions League game. Since I left, we've not had crowds back. The day that's got 54,000, and again, I think it'll be a tough day for me because I'll know Billy Hogan sat in my seat. So it will be difficult. But I'm a fan. I'm screaming at them. My son, who lives in Los Angeles, will have a text thread going, analyzing every kick. One of the things, and advice for all of you, is to get your children to support the same team that you do, so that when you get to my age, that they can live and die with you, with your team. He's an American, lives in Los Angeles, eats, drinks, sleeps Liverpool Football Club. I've had him over to Anfield several times. So, we have that back and two of, yes, Sadio lad, or can't believe what just happened type thing. So, and I could never do that watching the game in my club suit and tie and trying to be courteous. The one thing that I do enjoy is when we score, I can jump up and scream now. That's not done in the director's box. You would jump up and politely clap like this, but that's about as much as you're allowed to do.
Enjoy it as much as you can. Your other club is Wrexham, and Callan says, is there truth, or what can you tell us about the relationship with two very famous people in Hollywood, Ryan Reynolds and Rob McElhenney?
Yeah,
who are on the verge of buying the club. Is that right?
that is correct. Yes. Yeah, it's an interesting story. I got to meet Rob. He actually, where I'm sat, and Rob was right there about 4 weeks ago. He drove up from his home in Beverly Hills, as you do, and sat down with me and explained why he and Ryan Reynolds wanted to buy Wrexham Football Club. And just as background, when my dad, we left Liverpool to get a pub just between Wrexham and Chester, which my family still lives there in a little village called Marford. And my dad got the Red Lion, top of the hill in Marford, and I ended up living in Wrexham throughout my teenage years, playing for Wrexham schoolboys. Joey Jones was left back, I was right back. It was a fearsome twosome right there. You never came down the wings, the two of us there, and playing actually for North Wales schoolboys with Joey and Mickey Thomas. And so I was very involved. And if I wasn't at Liverpool or I wasn't playing, I played in the Welsh National League for the best part of a decade. Then I would go watch Wrexham in the racecourse ground. And in those days, they made the second division, what is now the championship. You'd get 15 to 20,000 at the racecourse. They were giant killers, beat Arsenal famously, and would play in the European Cup Winners' Cup because they'd win the Welsh Cup. And, you'd home to Peterborough, then away to FC Porto on a Wednesday night. And they were great days. So Rob and Ryan acquired the club because they wanted to do something for a community. Long story, give you the 30-second version. Rob, during lockdown, Rob's famous for Always Sunny in Philadelphia, and more recently, a great show on Apple TV called Mythic Quest, in which he plays a video game creator. So my worlds collide there. He had watched Sunderland Till I Die, and he said, from the opening, and I'm sure you've watched it, Steve. It's a phenomenal documentary. From the opening credits of that haunting song, he said, I know these people. This is Philadelphia. I don't know where Sunderland is, but this is Philadelphia. The Philadelphia Eagles, if you follow the NFL, are as crap as Sunderland have been over the past few years, to the absolute dismay of the community. And we all know what a huge football club Sunderland is. We all know, and if you haven't watched the documentary, and if it's available where you live, even if you don't like football, it tells you something about the human spirit and what sports, and in this case football, can do to lift the spirits of a community that has been downtrodden and forgotten. And Philadelphia was in the same place. He grew up in South Philadelphia, and he said, he called his mate Ryan Reynolds, again, as you do, and said, we've got to go do something, because I think with the amount of money we have, we're not using it well, and let's go find a football club, a soccer club that we can help and help the community. And Rob and I chatted for hours, and he, brilliant guy, great actor, but a great writer. And Ryan was just coming off Deadpool 2, I think, and getting ready for Deadpool 3, which I think is on the cards. But again, speaking with both of them, their hearts are absolutely in the right place. They're as funny as hell as regards guys to interact with, but they want to do good, and they realize the power of sport to do good. And they also realize that they can do something for a community they've never been to, they've never visited, but they've researched and they know everything about it. So everyone was saying to them, you should go find Petermore, because he grew up in Wrexham after leaving Liverpool. He played there for the schoolboy teams. He played at the racecourse, which I did. Now he's there in America and blah, blah, blah. So it's a volunteer for me. I spent a lot of time doing it, helping them pick through what football is all about. And, it's one of those things, again, I'm giving back to a place that has had a really tough last 10 years in Wrexham and North Wales, as industries have evolved and they haven't been able to take advantage of new industries that have grown up elsewhere and have taken labor away. So, yeah, it's going to be interesting. And I think we're pretty close to completion of the acquisition of the club. We're days away from the Supporters Trust. The club went bankrupt basically in 2008. And since then, it's been supported by a Wrexham Supporters Trust. So basically a fan-owned club to keep them alive. So I'm happy to be able to do that to help, again, a football club that gave me a lot of joy in the 70s in particular.
Oh, we still got you there, haven't we? Such a surreal story, but at the same time, wonderful that you're involved and there's lovely undertones to it. Look, we could go on forever about the gaming market, and we've spoken about this before, so you're going to have to be more concise because I realise time's pressing for you. Scott says, how easy was the transition from EA Sports to becoming CEO of Liverpool? But perhaps talk about the two sports, and gaming is a sport, isn't it? And you were there at the beginning, and now it's a multi-billion-dollar sport.
You know, everybody on the call, you'll have these moments in your life where you have to make a decision about a job. You have to make a decision about sometimes moving for a job. And sometimes you have to make a decision about, leaving an industry, if you will, that you've been in, that you feel very comfortable with, and stepping off the precipice and doing something that you bluntly have no idea about. And I did that for 20 years. When I arrived here in America in 1980, I worked in sporting goods. I was for 11 years, worked for Patrick. Those of you of a certain age will remember Patrick Boots. And I started off right here in Southern California as a commission-only salesman, selling boots up and down the California coast. And that taught me a lot about selling. I had no sales background, but I was a Scouser. So I could figure out how to get people to do things that they maybe didn't want to do, which was buy my shoes. The good news was, as many of you, if you play football, remember Patrick's were great shoes. Kevin Keegan wore them. I was selling Keegan Golds and Michel Platini Golds, even then for $125 a pair. And Patrick's were pretty ubiquitous in the 80s. And then I got recruited to go to live in Boston to do the same thing for Reebok, who were not in the global soccer business. And I built that from scratch. Went and got a young kid called Ryan Giggs to wear Reeboks when he was 17. And that's all he ever wore, and may still be wearing Reeboks as far as I know. Dennis Bergkamp, Andy Cole, and just built factories in Italy and was able to put Reebok into the global soccer business. My career evolved at Reebok and ended up in 98 being global senior vice president of global marketing for the brand, taking the Reebok brand around the world. But Reebok, these were the days, and you're all too young to remember when Reebok and Nike were head to head. These were the sneaker wars, but Nike had stolen, a real march on Reebok in the 90s, and I realized that I needed to be open to a career change. So again, as we led off this call, the executive recruiter, the headhunter, calls and says, "Hey, what do you know about video games?" And I said, "Nothing, other than I just bought my son a Sega Saturn, and they don't make games for it anymore, so I'm a little annoyed." He said, "Well, it's funny you mentioned that. Sega is looking for a senior vice president of marketing, and would you be open to interviewing? It's back in San Francisco." And I said, "Look, I know nothing about the industry, but he said, there's one thing that's interesting. This will be the first console that will go online, that will connect to the internet." And that piqued my interest a little, because I realized that should gaming become social and ubiquitous, then it had a chance to be more than what I used to say then, boys in their bedrooms, Donkey Kong and Nintendo. I took a chance. I said, yes, I'm leaving Reebok. I'm going to move back to San Francisco. And within 90 days, I was promoted to president and chief operating officer of Sega of America. We were launching the Dreamcast. The Dreamcast had a dial-up modem that allowed you, somehow we figured out how to make games play through dial-up, which was great unless your mom picked up the phone in the other room and then your game was disconnected as a result. But we launched the Dreamcast. In the end, we couldn't quite get the Dreamcast to where it needed to be. Sega had to get out of the hardware business. But I then caught the attention of Steve Ballmer and Bill Gates at Xbox, who I'd started to work with, obviously up in Microsoft, and got a call again from an executive recruiter that, hey, I'm an intermediary between you and Microsoft. They'd like you to consider coming up and living in Seattle, because they're launching a new platform yet to be named that will be the successor to the original Xbox. And they'd seen what I'd done with the Dreamcast. So yeah, again, took another chance, left San Francisco, hauled the family to Seattle, and had 5 wonderful years working for Microsoft as head of Xbox, and launched the Xbox 360. And that was a little bit more sophisticated. It actually had broadband, so you could actually play games on a broadband connection. But we also built Xbox Live, which was where where social gaming, that is now $160 billion industry, really started to take off. And then again, executive recruiter one more time said, pings me and says, "Time to come home." I always remember the email. And I clicked on the email as a recruiter that had taken me to Seattle and said, EA is building out a label structure and they're looking for a president of EA Sports. So I looked at that and thought, this is my two worlds colliding, sports and video games. I love the idea, once again, getting back to the San Francisco Bay Area, and joined EA in July of 2007 and had 10 wonderful years there. First of all, as president of EA Sports, and then for the last 5 years, being chief operating officer of EA. And then the executive recruiter calls, and it's Liverpool, and there's my life. Yes.
We can see how big it is. And there's a question here from Bainbridge Island FC, which says,
oh yeah, right in Seattle.
Can Peter give some examples of good, bad decisions he's made on his career pathway? Well, you've just mentioned a bit about your career pathway. But advice on a pathway within professional sport, is there one thing perhaps you'd say to people? Yeah,
I think, for me, within sports was a different industry. And so I was very used to, look, I found it frustrating the first few months at Liverpool Football Club because nobody was moving as fast as I was used to in Silicon Valley and video games. And I realized that I had to figure out how to integrate myself into an industry that had different metrics, different ways of operating, different speed of action, if you will. None of it which was wrong, but it was very different. And I think the key for me was to learn to understand that I wasn't always right, and that this was a tried, true, and tested process within the football industry of getting things right, maybe spending a little bit more time on getting them right than I was used to. Certainly in games and in technology, we would have this mantra of fail fast, fail cheap. And so the idea was throw a lot of ideas at the wall, prototype a lot of things, try different stuff. Great, spend some money on it. But if it didn't work, cut it, don't continue to throw good money after bad. And, that I tried that at Liverpool, and nobody wanted to fail, period. So there was a little bit more of a conservative attitude towards failure. In the industries, as you go back in, and I'll be tripping my way back into video games, it's still very much keep trying, fail, but fail quickly and fail cheaply, but try. So and then we can talk, and Bainbridge Island is just outside of Seattle. We can talk about the Red Rings of Death, which anybody that owned an Xbox 360 will remember, and that was one of the more jarring periods of my life where I realized that we had created a multi-billion-dollar problem with the hardware that eventually we came to grips with and spent over $1 billion fixing the problem. If we hadn't have done that, and I'm talking back in 2007, the Xbox brand wouldn't exist anymore, and Microsoft wouldn't be in video games. But that's a whole episode on its own, talking about the Red Rings of Death.
I'm just going to finish this off. You've been so kind with the time you've spared us. What do you feel most blessed about within that professional journey as you look back now?
For me, I think when I think about sports and I think about video games and sports again in Liverpool, to be witness to giving joy to so many people, not because I was able to do it directly, but to be involved in organizations, particularly sports, and then games themselves, and to be witness to the growth of games and ubiquity of gaming. I've been so blessed to be involved in industries that make people smile. And yeah, look, you lose games, you get frustrated. You lose a video game, you throw your controller at the wall. It's not all smiles, but for the great part, I've been involved in consumer industries that really bring brightness to people's lives. And right now you think about what we're going through with COVID, sports and video games are absolutely ubiquitous right now as the way that we are finding releases from this miserable world we're living in that just feels weird to all of us. And yeah, I can only think, for me, it's everybody's playing FIFA and watching Liverpool on Sunday, so there's my two worlds.
Peter, you've been an absolute gent. I'm sorry we couldn't get through all the questions. There's so many people on the call and so many questions in there, but you've answered a wide variety of them, and we wish you all the best in Santa Barbara and when you come back to Wrexham and Liverpool in the future. So great to catch up. Thank you, Peter.
It'll be a great day when I can come back to Anfield and there's 54,000 there. It'll be a great day when we can sing You'll Never Walk Alone again, particularly with the passing of Jerry Marsden and bringing us all back together again. So you bet I'll be on a plane heading to Liverpool to be able to enjoy that. And thanks for everybody for listening and put up to me. There's a whole lot of stories underneath all of this. It feels like we should do this again. So, but it's been a blast. I appreciate it. And thank you for all the questions. I'm sorry we couldn't get to them.
Peter, absolutely brilliant. On behalf of the whole LLS team and the Stephen Gerrard Academy, Peter Moore, our special guest today, and some fantastic stories live from Santa Barbara. Would you believe it? Thanks for joining us today, and we'll see you next time on another Extra Time.